And what we are going to discuss today is Nehru as a nation builder. So I would like to frame a question first. Why do we think of him as a nation builder at all? Why do we say nation builder? What are the central aspects of it? And I would suggest it consists of the following. That Nehru gave the topmost priority, first of all, to the independence of India. That is the highest priority. I'm giving it almost in a list of priorities in his mind and how he functioned throughout his tenure as Prime Minister, or even before that, when he led the national movement. First of all, independence was of paramount importance, and he never once compromised on that matter. After independence came democracy. That was his very high priority, but if a compromise was to be made, he would rather compromise democracy rather than independence, because you can lose a part of your democracy and restore it, but you lose your independence, you're not likely to restore it. So you must preserve your independence in order to do everything else. So democracy came next. Then, alongside democracy, and I'd hesitate to say which came higher in the order of priorities, was the unity of the country. Come what may, the unity of the country had to be maintained, and only that would enable India to be independent and maintain her democracy. If these were ensured, then next came what he called socialism. I'll explain in a little while what is meant by socialism, because that is a very controversial subject, I know, and many people have very different understandings of socialism. So what did he mean by socialism, and why did he think it's so important to have socialism? And finally, non-alignment. Now, why non-alignment, we might well ask. That is so important to this list of priorities. So let me start with the question of non-alignment, actually, which contributes to independence. I'm almost reversing the order, but the order is that independence is top priority, and I'll start with how non-alignment was meant to contribute to it. He was placed in the middle of the 20th century, before the Second World War, during the war, and after the war. And the world was divided between two major power blocks, the socialist and the capitalist camps. The socialist one led by the Soviet Union, the capitalist one led by United States and the British Empire, and after the war by the United States, with all the others as satellites. Now, in this world that was so divided, where would India fit in was a big problem. Not merely fit in, how would India retain her independence in a world that was so divided? This was his problem. You can easily join either camp and be satisfied. Communists were quite happy to be in the socialist camp, that is to be a satellite of the Soviet Union. Those who felt comfortable with capitalism and with the free market system felt following the American lead is by far the best, and belonged to that, and at least you keep the communists out of reckoning. So the choice to everyone appeared to be between the two. And if you're going to be independent, how will you be independent if you have to make a choice between them? If you join one camp or the other, you lose your independence. This is a central insight and central importance. And there's a point he'd been making from the 1920s, long before India became independent. And he gave the example of so many countries in Latin America and elsewhere which were technically independent but were in fact subordinated to the United States or to the Soviet Union, as the case may be. And he said that is not a form of independence that we want in India. You do not have to join either side. You do not have to accept the choice at all. You strike an independent path. Only then can you be independent. And that is how he chose non-alignment. He defined it as non-alignment, that we are neither in the Soviet camp nor the American camp. We'll strike an independent path, and that he called non-alignment. Now, this did not mean neutralism. It did not mean saying we are neither here nor there and that we are completely out of all conflicts. No, he said we'll make a choice in all world situations as to how we will act in each crisis. whether the crisis be in Indochina, or in Korea, or in the Middle East, or in Hungary. In each case, he said, we will make a choice, what position to take. And Nehru was a very active diplomat. He played a very major role for India in all these cases. And although India was so impoverished, just out of colonial rule, helpless in every way, you might say, but yet India played a larger role than she has ever played subsequently. Thanks to the quality of Nehru's diplomacy, his real commitment to all these ideals. He was a major player in the United Nations system. He provided the United Nations peacekeeping with forces from the Indian Army regularly and was always active in these matters. So it's not that he was not active. It's not that neutralism meant just standing by and watching other people have a fight. He participated, but not as a camp follower of any one of them. He would always be independent, take an independent position. You don't have to be a supporter of the Soviet Union or America. You can be independent, was the point he made, and he demonstrated the possibility in those years. And Nehru was easily the world's leader in taking that position. And he made it convincing enough to have a whole lot of other leaders from the decolonized world of that time. Sukarno in Indonesia, Nasser in Egypt, and even Tito in Yugoslavia, who would all join, and who did not want to join either side, but would join his non-aligned group of countries. And he said, while we are non-aligned, we are not making a new power bloc, which will challenge either the Soviet Union or America, because there was obviously no capacity to challenge them. The point is not to challenge, but to just be independent. And he did, and he maintained it. So that is the main way in which he first asserted his independence. It had to be independence from foreign powers, external independence in every way, and that is through non-alignment. We realize how original and important it is because nobody else was able to play that role. Pakistan fell victim. It became a satellite of America almost immediately. Burma did. All of Southeast Asia did. Iran, all of the Middle East, all of them became victims. Nasser held out during the 1950s and early 60s, and after he died, Egypt has become a satellite of America. The rest of the African countries are all American satellites, they have to be. They're too impoverished to be able to play an independent role. The whole of Latin America is. All of East Europe was, of course, a satellite of the Soviet Union, as we know. So India was pretty well unique in being able to be independent. The other one was China, which actually maintained her independence from the other two power blocs. And the third one would be Vietnam. Well, Vietnam had to fight pretty hard for it. There's a continuous war, and only in 1975 did he finally become free of the war. So Nehru said, for the world that had been colonies earlier, he would support the process of decolonization and encourage every one of them to be independent through non-alignment, and this is the only way. So for India, this was the path he chose, and he was most successful. This is the long-lasting legacy of Nehru for Indian foreign policy and of the Indian state. To this day, we retain that ideal, and whatever the conflict, India keeps an independent position of the two sides. Even in the contemporary conflict in Ukraine, India is able to negotiate a position that doesn't denounce Russia the way the whole of the Western world does. At the same time, is critical of Russia, demanding that Russia try to make peace. And when the American Secretary of State says there's no such thing as strategic autonomy, that is, India cannot be non-aligned, said no, India is autonomous. India is free to decide. It will not be a camp follower of America like the Western world is. Of course, there was a price to be paid. America consistently supported Pakistan on the matter of Kashmir, and we went to wars about it, and we've had this perpetual problem. And we continue to have the problem because of non-alignment. But it is better to be independent than to be a camp follower. And the point is, it is because of Indian independence in that manner that India was able to create an industrial base and follow an economic policy that is suitably independent of the two power blocs. That is why when India finally liberalized the economy, put an end to planning in effect in the 1990s, the Indian economy was able to develop very rapidly and develop independently without being at the mercy of the market forces let loose by America. So India got the advantage of being part of the marketized world without being a satellite. And this is the contrast with Pakistan. Pakistan and India are part of the same country until 1947. Pakistan went the other way, became a satellite. India retained her independence through non-alignment. Nehru was absolutely clear about this. And there's one point I just wish to put across. I hope you will ask me questions and challenge me on this. I'm looking forward to your questions on this matter. But let me get to the next point. Well, how do you maintain this independence? This is the external role you play. The role you play in the world is one way of one direction in which you maintain the independence. The other direction is the absolute insistence on the unity of India. Of course, he did not get a united India. The British managed to slice away Pakistan. But what came as a Republic of India, he never made any compromise again about the unity. Come what may, you have to preserve the unity. Only if the country is united can you maintain that independence. You have to sustain that unity, whatever happens. And he had to find all the different ways of maintaining that unity. Now, we might think today that it is quite easy to do so. We are a united country. We've been united for the past 75 years. What is the problem? Why shouldn't we continue to be so? What was the difficulty then? Well, you must remember he became Prime Minister in 1946, in effect. 47 after independence, but 46 already. He was in the interim government. It was one of the biggest jobs or the challenges that Indian nationalism faced in the years before the war of uniting such a disparate country. In case I don't need to remind you in any way that India has so many languages. You can start counting them depending which criteria you use for a language. But 15, 17, 20, 22, whichever way. India is the one state which has the largest number of languages within a state in the world. Not only that, we have multiple religions. We are only too well aware of that. And even each religion is internally divided into so many different sects and groups and churches or whatever. Again, as we know very well. But regionally, we are so diverse because each language has a separate state and its own traditions of development, which is different from every other. But that's not enough. We've got further internal divisions called castes. Nowhere else in the world is there something called caste as we have. And that divides us perhaps more than religion does. And then we have tribes, which are, in a sense, regarded like castes, but they are not. So with these multiple divisions of every kind, of language, religion, sociologically of castes, politically of tribes, and anything else you can imagine, how do you weld a unity and preserve that unity for the sake of independence? Well, this was the genius of the nationalists before 1947 and after, and especially the outstanding leadership of Mahatma Gandhi. He understood this more than anything else, and Nehru took his lessons from Mahatma Gandhi extremely well and extremely seriously. That is why he was so loyal to Mahatma Gandhi, come what may. They're very two different type of people, but they worked very closely together. And it was Gandhi's cardinal principle that whatever happens, one Indian should not fight another Indian. Hence non-violence. This is something that exasperated the communists, for example, revolutionaries of all kinds, Hindutva. Everybody was exasperated. They said, you must be able to divide and overcome opposition. Like the revolutionaries did in Russia, in China, in Vietnam, and all of them did it so successfully. So revolution is essential for liberation. If you are not revolutionary, how do you become free? There was no history or tradition of any colony becoming independent without a revolutionary overthrow of the foreigner as well as those who supported the foreigners. And those who supported the foreigners in India were who? The princes, the landlords, the capitalists. So it seemed obvious to so many that the first thing you have to do is to fight off the princes, the landlords, and the capitalists who were feeding off the British Empire. So one thing Gandhi did not allow. The moment you allow one Indian to fight another Indian, you're opening the way for the British intervention. And they will just give support to those who are panicked by the threat of revolution. So Gandhi took care that every division within the country preserved was overcome by unity in one way or the other. So he overcame caste divisions by getting Ambedkar to accept that the scheduled caste shall not constitute a separate constituency in the electoral system. Remember the reserved constituency and the problem of separate electorates. He worked very hard and managed to get that. He could not, of course, persuade Jinnah about the Muslims. That's the only thing that failed. But everything else, he outwitted the British, who tried to create these forms of divisions by promoting each one of these as supporters of the British. Finally, of course, the Muslim League became a supporter of the British and got Pakistan, but nobody else managed to. Gandhi, one by one, took care of that. So, overcoming all these divisions through the novel technique of non-violence was Gandhi's extraordinary contribution. Any form of violence would have led to more division, was effectively his insight. And he prevented that happening. And when you have further divisions, even if you win a revolutionary war, you're creating more enemies for the future, who would work to overthrow you, as happened in Russia, it happened in China, etc. There's always somebody who will live to overthrow, who will work hard to overthrow your regime, not only the British. So never allow that kind of a division to take place. Work for unification, overcoming these divisions under whatever the circumstances and whatever the challenges that you face. And Nehru fully endorsed this, and he was the greatest unifier of India after independence also. He took care that come what may, you should perpetually unify. And for that reason, secularism was so important to him. All communities should come together in one nation. India shall maintain its pluralism, its diversity. You can belong to any religion, any caste, any language, to any tribe. You will all be members of one nation only. And you'll have complete equality. And it's of interest to you to know that as we celebrate various holidays in the Indian calendar, you have Hindu holidays, you have Sikh holidays, Muslim holidays, and Christian holidays. Each of those holidays are celebrated as national holidays, not as religious holidays. Christmas, Nehru insisted, is not a Christian holiday. He said it shall be a national one. You do not segregate the Christians from the rest of the nation. You have to have it as a national one. And so it was with Eid, so with Guru Purab, and so on. Each community did not celebrate its own holidays. The whole state did, the whole nation did. And so we have holidays on all these days. Good Friday and Christmas are both national holidays, not just Christian. And in effect, we now celebrate it. Everyone enjoys those holidays, although Good Friday is not meant to be enjoyed exactly. It's to be remembered in another way. But anyway, it's respected in that form. But Christmas certainly is, and so on the others. This is just one example of how he insisted, how he brought communities together constantly. And secularism, of course, was a most important policy matter, because India had just been divided. It had gone through the most horrific partition trauma of the massacres and so on. And the most vulnerable community in India were not the scheduled castes and so on. It was the Muslims. They were blamed for the division of India. They were blamed for all the atrocities that took place against the Hindus in Punjab, Jammu, Uttar Pradesh, all these places. The Muslims were blamed endlessly, and that blame has spread further down the country and elsewhere. And Nehru said, no, they are not to be blamed. They are not they are the victims themselves of the policies of the Muslim League and of the British. They are not to be blamed. They have chosen to remain in this country. Therefore, they have full rights as members of this country as anybody else. They are not to be victimized under any circumstances. Now, he pursued that policy systematically and well. And during his reign, Muslims were as integrated as you could possibly do. What happened thereafter is something else. They have been used as a vote bank, as we call it. Nehru never did that. He merely said they shall enjoy all equal rights as anybody else and have as many opportunities as anybody else, but they shall not be segregated and made into vote banks. That's not what he ever did. But that's what happened under his daughter. And that led to a peculiar caricature of secularism, which had serious repercussions subsequently. So, the unity of the country in these ways to be maintained. And that is how he arrived at even an unexpected form of unification. As you know, in 1956, India was divided into what is called the linguistic states. The big division took place. A number of states were demarcated according to language. That is when Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh 3 years earlier, then all the other states one by one were created as parts of the union. Little later, Bombay was divided into Gujarat and Maharashtra. After his life, Punjab was divided into 3, Himachal, Punjab and Haryana, and so on. And these divisions have been continuing. Everyone thought, and he himself thought, that divisions of this kind is going to lead to yet another partition. How do you unify the country by dividing it in this fashion? The irony of it and the almost absurdity of it struck everyone. And in those days, people were terrified. We've just had the partition and Pakistan has been carved out of India. Are we now going to create a number of different Pakistans in this form? And won't India break up? But no, said Nehru, finally, although he had his serious doubts, he said no. Why does a creation of a linguistic state actually unify the country rather than divide it? The logic was this. As you create another state, which is internally unified through language and whatever community structures it has, you can develop a democratic mobilization within that state more effectively than if the state was mixed with other language-speaking areas, other community areas, and so on. Democracy goes deeper in such a state than it would otherwise. And once they are more democratically mobilized, they find that it is to their advantage to be a member of the Indian Union. They can pull their weight in Delhi, get the advantages of being a member of the Union, plus have all the advantages of having a separate state to themselves. And actually, it has stabilized Indian politics after 1956 to a significant degree. If India has successfully united, in one sense, it is because of the linguistic division of states. That is why we see this phenomenon of more and more states being created, and nobody is afraid of it. We've had Andhra divided into 2, UP has had 2 sections hived off, Bihar has had a section taken off, and so on. It's gone on so many ways that we are no longer worried about it if these divisions occur. It actually leads to a deepening of democracy and therefore the consolidation of the union. So the unification of the country has actually proceeded further. And the challenge that came from the Khalistani civil war in the 1980s was faced down because that is an attempt at overthrowing the republic itself. It is an attempt at secession, not at creating another state within the union. Once that challenge has been met, I don't think anybody in the country is any more afraid that the union will break up. So great is the confidence now, we've taken it for granted. We've forgotten the enormous creativity of Gandhi, Nehru, and all the nationalists of various kinds from the 1920s to the 1960s and 70s in maintaining the unity of the country. But it required major and creative acts of statesmanship of this kind, like the linguistic division of the country. But the next point, to preserve such unity, to preserve independence, the further requirement was democracy. People will join in the process of creating a nation and running the nation only if they have a stake in the nation, only if they feel that they are partly ruling the nation, they're participating in the state. Everybody, every citizen must recognize that the state is partly their own creation. That is what we mean by a citizen. We are citizens because it is our state. It's not another state that is being imposed upon us. When the British were ruling India, we were not citizens. We were subjects. Once the Indian Constitution was introduced, we became citizens of this new nation and under this state. It is our state. We are all participants in it. And one example of it, one instance of it, is that we all vote. We have the right to vote. The whole country has to vote. So democracy and maintaining democracy is the way of ensuring that there'll be an unshakable state. The greater the democracy, the more deeply held and the more widely based, the safer it would be. That's why he focused his attention not merely on parliamentary democracy, not merely on the elections to the state assemblies and on parliament and so on, but as much going deeper into panchayats. The panchayat is the third level, the bottom level of the democracy. You have the state at the parliament at the center in Delhi. You've got the state assemblies, another level of democratic election. And the third level is panchayats, which itself is divided into three levels. All these would sink democracy deeper and deeper, make the base so wide that you can have the image of the pyramid. The pyramid can never fall over. The base is so broad, the tip is narrow. And if the base is so broad, it will remain forever. That is why they're still standing after 5,000 years, or more than 5,000 years. And that is how he saw democracy should be based in India. That is why he was such a great proponent of Panchayati Raj. However local it might be, that local involvement of the whole population in the process of governance was vital in every way. So to preserve the independence, to preserve the unity, you need democracy, you need the unification of the country continuously through the democratic process. That will always continue. And all these would be maintained, of course. I mean, we've got the framework of the Constitution with which it will be done. So this is the reason we call him the nation, builder of the Indian nation. He's the one who saw most clearly the necessity of all these processes. And if you compromise on these, you're going to be compromising the unity, the independence of the country. And if we have unity and independence today, it is because that he placed such importance on it, and with it, this democracy, which could never be compromised. So thank you very much.